Good evening. This is the Torah on Parshas Beha'aloscha. It is the third Parsha Torah portion in the fourth book of the Torah, Bamidbar. At least that's the way it appears according to the format of the actual written Torah. I'll have more to say about that. And I would like to give some perspectives on it. This Parsha normally appears either right after Shavuos, or if not right after Shavuos, appears shortly thereafter. Either tonight's Parshas Naso, which will this be in case in Chutz La'aretz this year outside of Israel, and Parshas Beha'aloscha is coming in Israel for this week. And this Parsha is really a Parsha of transition, both for the time of year and historically what is going on. Now, to explain that, we last Thursday night, Friday, 6 days ago, we completed the holiday of Shavuot, or for those in Chutz La'aretz, it was for 2 days. It was completed on Saturday night, Motzei Shabbos, and this is the culmination of a period that began with Pesach, holiday of Passover. Then there was the Sfiras Omer, the counting of the Omer for 49 days, and then on the 50th day, which mirrored the historically. What happened historically, the Torah was received on Har Sinai, where it was Hashem descended from Shemayim to the earth, gave the Torah directly to the people. He spoke the first, he said 2 mitzvahs they heard directly from him. The other were transmitted via Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, and what did this whole period signify? And this whole period, which started with Pesach, Passover, was Hashem's beginning of the reenactment of history, or let's say giving it a new start. The original plan was that Adam and Eve, had one test only, not to eat from the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. The test they failed. And God gave them, their descendants, a long lifetime. And as explained by many sources, including the Ari Kodesh, that what they were supposed to do then, those 10 generations, they given long life to serve Hashem, to follow his commandments, which are the population of the world. They failed to do so. And then what happened is that the generation of Noah, the generation of Mabul, the flood, they were given a second opportunity to do that. They again failed. Hashem gave them with shorter lifespans. After the flood, another 10 generations, and in the 10th generation, they could have served Hashem. Instead, they tried to build a tower, called the Tower of Babel, to contest Hashem, and Hashem separated them into 70 languages, which resulted in 70 different nations, and so there was another failure by mankind. At that point, one more chance was given. The cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, which were now what we call the Dead Sea, but at that time was a garden spot of Eretz Israel and of Israel, and they could have used it for hospitality. Instead, they were extremely greedy and extremely evil, and they failed that test, which was to help perfect mankind. And then it fell, to do that perfection, it fell to the many Israel, Yaakov's descendants, Jewish people, to take on that task. To purify them, they were sent down to Egypt, which is sometimes referred to as in slavery, a fiery furnace. And Hashem, as the story is known, sent the 10 plagues and showed his mighty signs to Pharaoh. Now, the world as started with Adam and Chava, in which was now going to be restarted within the nation of Israel, since the whole human races had failed the experiment, had failed their chances for generation after generation. It began with the first day of Passover, because the world Hashem had built God on 3 things. One was chesed, kindness. Second one was kedusha, holiness. And the third one is free will. What I mean by bechira, free will, is the choice for people to either do the right thing or choose evil. Hashem has made the system so that we have this free will, this bechira, and if we do the appropriate thing, we do the mitzvahs and now follow the Torah, we're going to elevate the universe and elevate the higher worlds and start bringing us towards the final redemption. And if not, chas v'shalom, people do the opposite, it will lead to the universe going downwards, not upwards. And any event, so the first day had both qualities of both chesed, the people, Jewish people, to liberate them from Egypt, and also had kedusha, the holiness, which has its sides of both kindness, but also strict judgment, which was exercised against the Egyptians, culminating with the death of the firstborn males, Egyptians. And from then, it went to the 7th day. That was the crossing of the Yam Suf, the Red Sea. It split Bnei Israel. God saved his people, and then when the Egyptians tried following, the entire Egyptian army was wiped out. So there was an aspect of both kindness and then at the same time. However, even though evil was wiped out, Hashem, as explained in this part I've been speaking about, is based largely on writings of Leshem, Rav Shlomo Eliashiv, Zikon Tzaddik L'Bracha, and it then led to the to maintaining bechira, free will. So all the circumstances were raised to get the world to a new level. Then on the holiday of Shavuot, celebrating the receiving of the Torah, at that time, the Bnei Israel, God's people, were raised to the level of Adam and Chava before they committed the Chet, the sin of eating from the fruit. And what could have potentially had happened then, if they had not succumbed 40 days later, unfortunately, everybody received 2 crowns, spiritual crowns. What could have happened is we would have went into Eretz Israel shortly thereafter, and within a year, and great things would have been achieved. It would have been a final perfection of both the Olam Hazeh, this world, and the spiritual higher worlds, and there would have been the ultimate redemption and fulfillment of God's ultimate purpose. Now, 40 days later, those crowns were taken away because when tempted with the golden calf, parts of the people succumbed to it, Hashem ultimately, after a lot of negotiation by Moses, Moshe Rabbeinu, allowed us to continue, didn't destroy us, and he, however, put us on certain, still loved us, and even with that, was planning to allow us to go into Eretz Canaan, conquer Israel, and again, led by Moshe, would have been the ultimate redemption. Now that's the historical. If one looks at the parshas we have now, Parshas Bamidbar, the first parsha of Sefer Bamidbar, was taking censuses, arranging the camps of how the people were going to travel. The second one is dealing with various laws, the second parsha, Naso, and it's also the gifts, the construction of the sanctuary of the Mishkan, and preparing travel. Now, in the third parsha, which is the one we're in now, there is an interesting sequence of events. In Beha'aloscha, there is, first of all, it starts with the commandment of Aaron to light the menorah every night in the Mishkan, and this was in compensation for the fact that when the princes gave the gifts in last week's parsha, Aaron was not asked to bring a gift to sanctify the temple. Instead, he was given the lighting of the menorah. Now, even though the sanctuary no longer exists in it, to Bate Mikdash and the temples were destroyed, this mitzvah is emulated in the holiday festival lights, is called of Hanukkah. So his was an eternal duty in a sense, as opposed to those of the Mishkan. And then the parsha goes on to talk about parshas, to talk about redeeming the Levium, who would help the Kohanim, the priests, in the sanctuary, help assemble it and transport it and help rebuild it. And there is then the celebration of Pesach, second Pesach, and for those who were impure, he explains there's a whole bunch of the people who were ritually impure. Why? Because they've been carrying the coffins of the 12 tribes, not only Yosef's coffin, but that of his 11 brothers. And the laws of that are explained. And explained the date that the Mishkan, the sanctuary, was set up. There was a cloud of glory hanging over during the day, and there was the fires. There was a column of fire at night. And whenever the cloud stayed down, they would stay in the location. Whenever it went up, they would assemble and start traveling. And for the 40 years, they were ultimately going to be in the desert, which originally wasn't going to be 40 years. They also had 2 silver trumpets made to help to assemble the leadership as well as the people as a whole until it went to march. And they describe the first trip journey. This was the first journey away from Sinai where they had been. Moshe's father-in-law, Yethro, comes to visit him again. And after a whole discussion, when Moshe asked him twice to come with, even though it doesn't specifically say it in the Chumash, Yethro came to Eretz Israel and descended, and his descendants lived in Israel. Now, in the middle of all this, there is something, we have something unique. At the end of the 10th chapter, there are something in the only place it is in the entire Chumash. There are 2 pasukim bracketed on each side by an inverse nun. That's the letter nun. And it says, Vihi b'nisa aron v'yomer Moshe, Uma Hashem yivtzu, V'vecha v'yinasu, Mishanecha mimenecha, Menuchos Omer Shavi, Adonai Rabavos Alefei Israel. When the ark would journey, Moshe said, Arise, Hashem, and let your enemy foes be scattered. Those who hate you flee from before you. And when it rested, he was said, Reside tranquility, O Hashem, among the myriad thousands of Israel. Now, there are many explanations. After that was the beginning of the problems. There's the rebellions. And Hashem was so angered by the murmurings of the people, complaints, that he sent a fire that burned many of them. It was only with Moshe's prayers that it stopped finally. The people started complaining, all we have is man, which remember was the ideal food. And instead they protested. Moshe said, please, I can't bear this whole people. And Hashem then said, okay, choose 70 elders. They'll get some of the share of the prophecy from you. And they did, so he had people to help him there. And the final part of the parsha is Aaron, Moshe's brother, and Miriam, Moshe's sister, complained to Moshe that what he was doing is not right, because he did not have a full relationship with his wife, while Aaron had a full relationship with his wife, and Miriam had with hers. And they said, well, look, we're prophets, and we have a full relationship with our spouses. Why don't you? And at that point, Hashem called him outside, explained that Moshe was the most modest of men. So he had to defend. Hashem defended himself and explained that Moshe was different. He spoke to him panim el panim, the only face to face. In other words, he would come to Hashem would come to Moshe at any time when he was awake. There was no warning of when he would come, so he's always had to remain pure, which not the case of Miriam and Aaron. They were both punished, with Miriam getting saras, a disease for speaking improper speech, lashon hara, even though she had a purpose in it. And why she still got punished, I'll explain in next week's parsha, which is more apropos to, more relevant to. And that's how the parsha ends. Now, the part I would like to focus on now is the middle parsha. Now, where we have these two separate verses with inverted nuns, the deeper meaning of these verses and of the nuns I will speak about next week, because it's not only tied to this week's parsha, it's really connected to next week's parsha Shalach, when the Meraglim, the spies, are sent out to tour the land. Now, even though the Jewish people who committed the sin of the Egel Zahav, the golden calf, we were still given the opportunity, would have to enter Eretz Israel, and Moshe would have led it. And as I'll explain more next week, what the consequences of that in a positive sense would have been. Now, the question is, why are these two Pesukim uniquely have a nun, inverted nuns, that a nun, and what does it signify? Rashi explains on a basic level that what is going on here is that these two verses are to separate the decline of the people. We've now, what should have happened, look, as we have today, celebrated the holiday of Shavuos. We're going to have about 4 or 5 weeks, hopefully beautiful weather of the world is green, summertime, end of spring and summer. And that is mirrored in the Parshas here. Because in this week's Parsha, effectively is the beginning of a long decline, and Rashi explains why do we have these two verses? It's to separate so there won't be three sins together. What was the first sin? Was leaving the way we left Har Sinai. Now Hashem commanded us to. Now the people could have been sorry, because for years they were seeing Hashem, felt Hashem's presence. They were learning His Torah, learning His commandments. Yet what did they do when they learned His commandments? When it was time to go, they left like eager school children who wanted to get out of school. Instead of feeling sorry when they were leaving Hashem's holy mountain and His presence and moving away. And that was the first sin they did. Then we have the two verses that I mentioned. Then after that, there's two more declines. Now, what are the other two declining factors? What are the two sins? First of all, they could be complained against and murmured against Hashem, and for which they suffered punishment. And then the next one was demanding that they were complaining about the man, which was the ideal food, which was totally spiritual, left caused no waste. And they were complaining to craving the food of Egypt, the fish and the melons and everything else, and the meat. And Hashem fulfilled their request, but as soon as they tried eating it, He struck down all of those people who complained, because basically they were saying what Hashem decided was just not good enough. And that's on one level. On another level, this is signifying, those two verses are effectively a whole book by themselves. In fact, encompassed with them, as I'll explain next week, was an alternate history of what could have happened to both the Jewish people and the whole world. It's an alternative history, if you like, and I will explain in more detail what actually did happen. And therefore, they, according to not the written Torah, it says 5 books. In the oral Torah, it explains that this is effectively 7 books of the Torah, because the 4th one, Parshas Bamidbar, is split into 3 pieces. One was up to but not including these 2 verses. Then those 2 verses, verses 34 and 35, Pasukim 35 and 36 in chapter 10. And that constitutes a separate book, one of a very positive nature. And this last part, which consists of the rebellion and the testing of God by the Jewish people twice, and the whole incident with Miriam and Aaron and Moshe. Now, in this period of after Shavuos, this is a period when Hashem has granted us our new year of learning Torah, and this is a time we should be seeking spiritual growth, and it's a time of year where we're also given a beautiful environment to do that. And next week, we're going to see in Parshat Shlach the deeper meaning of this Parsha, these 2 Pasukim, and how the different ways the history of the Jewish people in the world could have played out at the time of Moshe. May everybody have a good Shabbos and Shabbat Shalom.